Welcome back to another top 3 tips for beginner pianists. I'm here today with Eleonor Bindman, and she's a top recording artist, a well-known and respected pianist, and has also transcribed much music by Bach. Eleonor, welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm very happy to talk about adult amateur pianists.
That's great. Thank you for joining us. I just wondered if you'd like to say a few words about yourself, just introduce just a little bit about your background.
Of course, well, I was born in Europe, in the former Soviet Union, and received most of my music education starting there and then in the United States in Brooklyn, where I live now. And for the past 10 years, I kind of fell into transcribing Johann Sebastian Bach's works for piano, of course, his other instrumental works. It started with the Brandenburg Concertos, which I transcribed for 4 hands, just because the existing transcription didn't work, which is why it's never recorded or played, really. And then I ended up transcribing the cello suites for piano. My lute suites are just finished, and I also did the orchestral suites plus some others. So I'm kind of living and breathing Bach, and very happily, my transcriptions are usually suitable for amateur pianists. So I'm very happy to share my experience with
That's
teaching
fantastic.
also.
That sounds great. I wondered if you would, because we're going to focus on memorization, aren't we, today? And I wondered if you would like to share perhaps your top 3 tips based around memorization. It comes up a lot in our adult beginner Facebook group, and it's quite linked to the recording. And as you being a recording artist as well, could be very relevant to a lot of our listeners when they're actually trying to record. A lot of the time, their memory, they get a bit of a memory lapse and find it difficult to continue with the recording process. So I wonder if you could share a few tips that might shed some light on how to help them.
Absolutely. I think memorization is a very hot topic, especially for amateurs, simply because sometimes one just adds pressure on oneself by memorizing, right? But of course, the professional pianists who set a very high bar for amateurs mostly play by memory. So how do we enhance this particular ability, and how do we approach it? So the first thing I'd like to say is that, in my opinion, memorization is a bit of an ability that we are born with. The capacity to memorize differs from person to person. And of course, we can help ourselves. There are ways to help us memorize better, but still, the professional pianists are always the people who are already possessing this very, very great capacity for memorizing. That being said, the ways to help the process are really very similar to the ways to practice efficiently, and especially as far as the cognitive approach to your piece. So I can go into the 3 tips. I actually have some of them described on my website, but I kind of call them the 4 Ps for pianists. They're perspective, planning, and then since we're doing 3 tips, we'll do practice and perseverance. So first, if you don't mind, I'll talk about perspective as my first tip.
Great, thank you.
Great. So we all know that it's important to practice, and it's important to practice in an organized way. I think that the cognitive impression of the piece, the knowledge of the music, is very important in order to be able to memorize, because as you know, there are really two main types of memorization, which is the sensory memory, which comes from repetition of a piece enough times. So your fingers, after you play something 20, 40, or 100 times, depending on who you are, they will know where to go. And when people have memory slips, it's an issue of the other part, which is the cognitive memory. So I think that approaching a piece as you started with the analytical mindset with looking at it and understanding how it's made is a first step in learning a piece, which will later make the entire memorization process a lot more efficient. As we know, Franz Liszt, his first lesson with his students involved just looking at the music, not playing. So, of course, on the level of an amateur pianist or a beginner, it's very much like, in a way, sight reading, because when we sight read, the first thing we need to do is we need to look at the piece, right? We can't just start playing a piece unless we looked at it for a few seconds and assessed the time signature, etc., the notes, the range of each hand, etc. So that to me is the first step in approaching learning and then memorizing a piece is, and I call it perspective. And
So
that
you're not
can
looking. You're not looking. You're not talking about the structure specifically, the ranges and the limits of the piece.
I'm talking about everything, the structure, which can mean on a very basic level, how many measures are there? If you're a very beginner and there's 16 measures, there are probably going to be 4 phrases or 4 measures each. And it's important to see, for example, does anything repeat? Because if we practice the whole piece through, we're basically practicing the repeat twice, and we're therefore making the other pieces, the other parts in a way more difficult because they do not get repeated as much. So that's what I mean by the structure. And then looking at the piece and with the minimal knowledge of music theory, which is not that difficult to acquire even online if you don't have a teacher. But of course, a teacher can help you do all of this right away. But you should understand what the intervals are. You should understand when the left hand is playing more or less, because all of that will help you understand the piece cognitively much better. So when you practice it, that part of memorization is those wheels are kind of turning every time you play.
That sounds very interesting. And so what we'll do is move straight on to tip number 2. And do you mind?
Yes.
I'll interrupt you if I've got any questions along the way.
Absolutely. So tip number 2, and this may sound a little unusual, is planning. And what I mean by that is planned practice. Not in the sense that I will practice every day at 10 a.m. for 15 minutes, but I will practice this particular section of the piece this many times, and then the more difficult section of the piece I will practice twice as many times. And this approach of having a plan when you sit down to practice is already setting you up for success, because you know what you're going to do, as opposed to I'm just going to practice for 15 minutes this particular piece. So the
That's
important
what
thing, go ahead, were you
often does happen is people start at the beginning and go right through to the end and practice. So what you're talking about here is a bit of focused practice.
It's a focus practice, but very specifically dividing a piece into sections, not repeating, if the same section repeats, not practicing it twice as much. And also, if you have a difficult section, it's not a bad idea to start with it. But the way to accomplish that is to have a practice log. So in my book, the second tip, which is planning, has to do with literally keeping a log, because it disciplines you into planned practicing.
That's great. A lot of people do actually in our group. Sometimes the question does come up of having a practice book where they can actually make notes. I think that's a good idea, logging down what exactly you need to do and what you have done, so that there you then do know where to focus, and not starting, like you said, right at the beginning, but working on a section perhaps in the middle and making sure you do go over that the required amount of times to actually give that some focus.
Exactly. And keeping a record of it, because we don't necessarily always remember exactly what we did yesterday or the day before, right?
No,
It
no,
helps.
that's. And I think you'll see if you try these methods out, you will see the progress that you make and how much advancement that you get, and how much more capable you become at playing the piece. So on to tip number 3.
Well, tip number 3 is practice and perseverance, because once you've cognitively assessed the piece, once you divide it into sections and understood which are easier, which are harder, then it's a matter of repetition. And one has to understand that it takes a lot of repetition to memorize something. And if you're one of the lucky ones, it may not take you as many times as, I don't know, 200, let's say. But if you have a shortish piece and you practice it every day for 20 minutes or a half hour, you could get in a lot of repetitions. And I personally, when I learn a new piece, I keep track of repetitions just because it gives me that disciplined way of sitting down, and then I know when I'm done. So perseverance is key, because sometimes we need literally hundreds of times until a piece is memorized.
Yes, I like the idea of the regularity of it. The other thing I like the idea of, I don't know what you think, it's if you are practicing, you said 20 minutes a day, but perhaps maybe splitting your practice time up might actually, in the day, so you practice twice a day, but perhaps not so much. That might actually help to get it within the memory as well. I don't know what you think about that.
I agree with that 100%. And I also, in my memorization workshops, address that it's much better to play 15 minutes twice a day than a half hour or more at once. And also, because that's how it gets into your long-term memory. The more repetitions, the more it gets into your long-term memory. And also, after a while, we all can lose focus. So the first 15, 20 minutes of practicing, or even 10, you'll be much fresher and more in focus. And then to promote memorization, it's also very important to understand that you will forget from day to day. You may remember a section of a piece at the end of your practice this evening, let's say, but tomorrow morning, it's normal that you won't retain all of it. You may remember bits of it. So not to get discouraged, because it takes a while for it to pass into long-term memory. And even after you feel you memorize the piece, you need to revisit it periodically.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. I think that's very, very good advice. And I have to say, I agree with everything you've said. And so I want to say thank you very much for joining us today on the top 3 tips with your valuable insights. Can you just so kind of not summarize, but finish with just a little bit about what you might be doing in the future? And I believe you've got something to offer to our kind of viewers and to the members of the Adult Piano Beginners Club.
Well, I'm actually going to be in London launching my album, my latest transcription project of Bach's suites, which were written for lute harpsichord or the lute. They're both versions that exist. And I'm very excited to be doing that at the 1901 Club on March 23rd. And I also am very happy to share with your viewers my transcription of the Bach cello suites. So those are the main things I think that could be used as resources. And I would love to promote, because what's really important to me is to help adult amateur pianists to enjoy what they do, and not to have to play for months and practice and feel frustrated when they want to play beautiful music, particularly of Bach. So I've made a lot of transcriptions, including my volume called Stepping Stones to Bach, where his instrumental and choral works are not condensed, but the themes are presented in mostly one-page format, which really helps just enjoy your piano practice.
That's great. Thank you very much. That's very generous of you. And thank you again for joining us on the top 3 tips, and hope to see you again next time. Thank
My
you.
pleasure, and good luck to all the adult amateurs. Keep at it.
Thank you.